Absolutely. In the last 3 days, we've gone through a roller coaster of emotions as citizens of this country, as most of us stopped what we were doing to listen in to what KZN top cop Mkhwanazi had to tell the Madlanga Commission. Shock, horror, stunning, astounding are just some of the adjectives I would use to describe some of the testimony that he gave around the alleged rot in our criminal justice system. Businessmen, members of parliament, ministers, current and suspended were not spared from the list of those who are deemed to be part of the corruption and not having families receive the justice they deserve. As you've mentioned, I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo, and we're giving you a special broadcast here from the Brigitte Mabandla Justice Academy in Pretoria, where the Madlanga Commission has been sitting. And who can forget that we are at this moment because of that 6th of July briefing by Mkhwanazi. There's lots of talk about Mkhwanazi's supposed breaching of protocol, which on Friday he clarified that he broke no protocol and feels justified by his actions on that day. And as for how he was dressed, especially because of the president being out of the country at the time, this is what Mkhwanazi had to say during his testimony.
I'm more curious about the dress code on the day and the fact that people who appeared were armed. Just give us a general picture. Is that normally how your team dresses? Why were they dressed that way on the day?
Although we have to now display our tactical strategies in public, but commissioners, as we're investigating and this picture coming together, then we start realizing that we now have to move from being a service provider to society to becoming a force in order for us to prevent the Ecuadors and the Mexicos to happen in this country. Because the threat, the enemy that we saw that is infiltrating crime intelligence, is infiltrating parliament, and is controlling our executive authority and going into the heart of the police operations, which is investigation. To date, I'm speaking to you, the Matlalas and the likes, if you go and see the record of cases withdrawn against Matlala, more than 18 here in this province. And you really realize that you can no longer wear a tie and face this fight. So this is a fight that requires, for one, to apply the tactics that is learned over years. And one had to draw on experience I had in the task force of saying, how do you deal with a terrorist? And because as I see it now, I think this is terrorism. This is people who want to take over government, not through the ballot paper, but through this criminal activity.
Mkhwanazi also unveiled something that I think South Africans should be extra vigilant about. He told a story about incarcerated businessman Vusumuzi Kat Matlala and a conversation that he had with one of his associates regarding the impending arrest, as reported in the media, of National Police Commissioner Fani Masemola. In this conversation, this associate expresses a negative response to this report, to which Matlala responds that it's a good thing that the police commissioner would be arrested. This talks to the positions within the upper echelons of the South African police service being infiltrated by the criminal underworld.
So they're a typical example of what Kat Matlala sends to his associate. But to prove that his associate does not apprehend what is going on here, his response says, not good. A logic tells you that a story like this of the top management of the police being investigated, it can't be good. That is his expression, Mr. Van Wyk. But then the response from Matlala says, it's actually good my person is going to be a national commissioner now.
So what this tells us is that the issues around the appointments and key positions within our very critical law enforcement agencies is being discussed by members in the criminal underworld. And yes, while these allegations are yet to be tested, we must remember as South Africans that the Hawks has a top job that is vacant after the retirement of Lieutenant General Godfrey Lebeya. In 2026, January to be exact, the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batowi, is retiring. And here we've just heard about Fani Masemola and some expressing glee at his possible removal. Let's bring in political analysts to talk more about this, because how do we as South Africans ensure that because we don't have control over the appointment process, it's largely left in the hands of the president, that we don't have the wrong people in key positions? This is critical because Mkhwanazi claims that IDAC, the Investigating Directorate Against Corruption, has been infiltrated, and this is a unit within the NPA. There's going to be a vacancy for the NDPP very soon. The Hawks were mentioned by Vusimuzi Kat Matlala. And you also have Matlala talking about his person becoming the next National Police Commissioner. It's startling, to say the least.
Of course, it is startling, Ziyanda. Good evening, and good evening to your viewers. Of course, the head of Hawks is appointed by the Minister of Police. And then, of course, NDPP, National Commissioner of Police, is in the hands of the president. You'll remember that when President Ramaphosa came into office in 2018, he tried to set up these quasi-panels, sort of almost like deferring his powers to the panels. In fact, Shamila Batohi was a product of that process.
Now, the first time.
And was the first time the SARS head, but that remains in the purview of the president to appoint. And I think what is probably interesting in this situation is when we heard Kwanazi saying that there's almost withdrawal of the process to appoint a new head of Hawks, saying, you know, partly because they've intercepted the would-be person of the underworld, or that people no longer qualify because of age. But I think that these are some of the institutions that would have been said to be hollowed out by state capture back in the time, and there's been an attempt to rebuild them. People, if you look at the general public conversation, have not really regained confidence in the National Public Prosecuting Authority, the NPA, partly because, I mean, they've seen botched cases, withdrawal of certain, you know, matters that would have been taken to the courts. But I think there is an imperative on the president to really make sure that South Africans do not feel a vacuum in the leadership of these institutions, and that he must implore the Minister of Police, now Prof. Kachalia, to actually act with speed in filling the vacancies of the Hawks. We've seen him, of course, today making some changes in terms of appointing a Chief of Staff, because Senzo Mkunu's Chief of Staff, Nkabinde, has been quite well implicated by Mkhwanazi over the last 3 days.
How likely is it, Lukhona, that the President is monitoring these proceedings very closely, if at all, given how we also heard from Mkhwanazi this week about how he tried to take various steps, including trying to reach out to the president himself directly, because the minister reports to the president, and this was around the possible disbandment of the political killings task team. Surely he should be watching this, and perhaps might even be considered complicit in not dealing with some of the issues, the systemic issues that Mkhwanazi raised.
Well, of course, the president has a variety of people who are on watch, who are attending the commission from time to time. And I think it's because it is his commission after all. So he has to be watching this. He has to anticipate what is coming. I mean, he has given a lot of urgency to the commission chairperson that after 3 months he must get a report, which will then assist him to act against certain individuals. He is the commander-in-chief of all armed forces, and therefore he must take a serious interest in terms of what is happening within the police, because one of the things that South Africans are dealing with is the question of violence, but also public, corruption and all of this, which then gets reported to the police, and they must act expeditiously to resolve those cases and make sure that they are fit for prosecution. So therefore, the president ought to be watching quite closely the proceedings, keeping, of course, an open mind. Like you are saying, we've just only had the evidence of Mkhwanazi being led. There'll be other witnesses that are led. There might well be cross-examination examination. Implicated persons might come and give their differing versions, and there'll be contested versions, and it will be in the hands of the commission at the end of the day to then decide how it weighs the evidence that is put before it, and then come up with comprehensive recommendations, which the only person who can really do something about those recommendations is the president. Of course, some might be directed to law enforcement institutions.
The very law enforcement institutions that you might not even be able to trust, right? But if we listen in on what Mkhwanazi said over the last 3 days, and we remember the terms of reference of this commission, which say and give powers to this commission to investigate anything that may urgently be requested, what do you think is at the top of the list? For me, it would be going back to the Ekurhuleni Metro Police Department, where they gave Vusumuzi Matlala blue lights, unduly so, and the EMPD chief who had flagged this ultimately got suspended. Is that something that can immediately be picked up, or not a priority?
No, I think it is a priority, because remember, the Metro Police in Gauteng, all three of them, Ekurhuleni, Johannesburg and Tshwane, are part of the terms of reference in terms of investigating. And I think it's important that, the commission investigates what are the circumstances as to which a private citizen would have their cars registered under the municipality and then blue lights given. And whether or not this is something that is pervasive across the three metropolitan municipalities, where private citizens, the allegations of, police driving private people's cars and all of these things, the proximity that certain individuals enjoy, or the capture that certain individuals enjoy of certain institutions. And I think, our metropolitan municipalities, as you would know, a number of things, blue lights, hijacked buildings, and all of those are things that circle criminality. The flow of drugs happens in the cities. Yeah. And when Mkhwanazi is talking about the drug cartels and so on, we know that the clientele base of those drugs is majorly in the cities. The movement of those drugs is majorly in the cities. The protection of the drug dealers is majorly done by Metropolitan Police. So I do think that the Chief Investigative and Forensic Officer of this commission has a lot of work to do.
Speaking of a lot of work, and work that was not done, is how Mkhwanazi told us that he had deposed an affidavit to the Zondo Commission. That commission cost an arm and a leg. We've still debated whether there was value for money there, but that should tell us something.
No, of course it does. I mean, commissions by nature, because they're appointed by the president, it almost seems as if you talk to people who have been involved, whether in investigation, whether as evidence leaders of various commissions, there tend to be certain omissions that are created or built into the system. What the motives are of those omissions is something else. Mkhwanazi would have been an acting police national commissioner 2011-2012, and he deposed an affidavit, which seems to be very comprehensive. The commissioners were told they can read it at their leisure. He quoted quite extensively in terms of the political interference that would have been there in police, the usage of certain institutions, from your IPID to your Hawks and so on, to target people, the usage of crime intelligence in illicit ways during the times of Richard Mdluli, Minister Mtetwa was mentioned, and so on. So yes, he actually transported us 14 years ago, 15 years ago. And we know during those times, Ziyanda, you know this, we used to joke and say hi to the people of Richard Mdluli before we actually proceed with the phone call, because there was a lot of misuse of crime intelligence in the country for political means. And I think it's curious as to why Mkhwanazi would not have been called into the Zondo Commission. Well, it may well be that the Zondo Commission would say, look, their recommendations were flowing from the Public Protector's State of Capture report, which mainly dealt with state-owned enterprises, but clearly there were elements that, in the criminal justice system were touched upon in the Zondo Commission. So it remains curious, and I wonder if maybe Advocate Pretorius or, the former chairperson of the Zondo Commission himself, Justice Zondo, would be able to give commentary. It would be a curious way to find out as to why maybe Mkhwanazi was not called.
Mkhwanazi's concluded with his testimony. Who should be called to the stand first thing on Monday morning?
I think General Khumalo probably should be the next person called, because remember, the part one of his testimony was dealing with the disestablishment of the political killings task team, which has to do with that disestablishment, the handling of the 121 dockets. General Khumalo seems to have been very much at the front and center of that, transportation of dockets and so on. It seems as if the commissioners are quite curious as to what would have developed there. I do think that soon after that, the Chief of Staff, Nkabinde, has a lot to answer, because he was at the center of drafting that letter of the 31st December 2024,
Yes.
and Mkhwanazi says to him, Nkabinde is quite known to Mkhwanazi. Nkabinde says he was under pressure to dispatch this letter. It was doing to and fro. And I think as Chief of Staff of the Minister of Police, before the Minister of Police probably is called himself, Minister Ziyanda Ngcobo, probably Nkabinde must precede that, so that whatever is being put to the Minister of Police, there is benefit of the Chief of Staff, because that's the recipient, that's the in-tray, out-tray of the minister, basically.
And that Chief of Staff has now been removed from the private office of the police minister, announcing a reshuffle of sorts within the police ministry on Friday afternoon. Lots to talk about after Mkhwanazi concluded day 3 of his testimony here at the Brigitte Mabandla Justice Academy. Let's take a short break. When we return, we'll continue with our discussion and reflections of Mkhwanazi's testimony. Now, one of the key testimonies from the last 3 days has been how criminals in the underworld have continued to also have the assistance and use members of parliament to also reach the upper echelons of the police executive. But perhaps what we didn't anticipate from Mkhwanazi was him giving us 2 specific names of members of parliament that he claims have directly interrupted operations of the South African Police Service. The National Coloured Congress's Fadiel Adams and the DA's Ziyanda Ngcobo were mentioned. Now, Adams is someone who 10 days after that 6th of July briefing actually told Parliament that the only reason why Mkhwanazi held that briefing was because he had an impending arrest against him. Yesterday, after Mkhwanazi testified about Adams's alleged infiltration and direct contact with suspended Police Minister Ziyanda Ngcobo, he questioned the standing of Mkhwanazi and his ulterior motives.
So Mr. Adams appeared to have came into the position of an intelligence information. And this information is classified on its nature that Mr. Adams should not be in possession of. So it is an information that is intended for another structure of parliament. If it comes to his position and as a lawmaker, as a person who is serving in parliament, he ought to know that when I'm in possession of information from crime intelligence that is classified, it must be handed over to the Joint Standing Committee of Intelligence so that it can be interrogated, regardless of the status of that information. So that is expectation that one has towards a lawmaker, such as Mr. Fazal Adams.
Thursday testimony. It was the second day of the inquiry, and in the last 24 hours, both Adams and Ziyanda Ngcobo have responded to Mkhwanazi's claims. As I mentioned earlier, Adams questioning the motives of Mkhwanazi.
If a general sees me performing my civic responsibility of reporting alleged crime where I see it, if he sees that as interference, then he must explain to me why he's a police general. Because let me tell you something, when he staged that that press conference and he started making allegations against senior people in SAPS, let me ask a question. If this man is accusing me of stepping out of my lane, why did he not lay charges against him? Why come and try them in the court of public opinion? Why do it at there's internal controls for all of this? He followed none of that. Jeremy Vieri was fired for saying Murala on social media. General Mkhwanazi comes on, makes allegations against the minister, produces no proof. Makes allegations against the Deputy National Commissioner, produces no proof. But nothing happens to him. He's not called into disciplinary hearing. Is this man the holy cow of South Africa?
So on the part of Ziyanda Ngcobo, it becomes very interesting because she's on the alternate members list for the ad hoc committee that will also be looking into these very allegations that have been made by Mkhwanazi. She spoke to Newzroom Afrika on Thursday, refuting and denying these claims rather, and saying that there's simply not enough evidence.
I have no idea why he's felt the need to make this statement. He's even suggested my involvement in a criminal syndicate and that I've leaked sensitive information. Now, I was on the JSCI, the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence, last term, the full term, no issues. And then it was obviously dissolved at the end of the last Parliament. On the 17th of February this year, there was extensive reporting. There were photographs in national newspapers about the properties. And I wrote to the Inspector General of Intelligence as an ordinary MP, formally requesting an investigation into what seemed to be dubious purchases of the two properties by crime intelligence. That was out in the public domain, and the request was a direct response to the serious concerns raised. My inquiries to the Minister of Public Works, for example, confirmed that no approach had been made for the properties. There are many public works properties that are utilized, and that's basically a fundamental legal requirement for such acquisitions. Now, the various reports in the newspapers suggested the purchases were approved internally by high-ranking SAPS crime intelligence members, bypassing proper procedure, and that raised significant red flags. Bear in mind that the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence took a full year from the time of the national election to operationalize. So it was months before the committee was formally constituted that I wrote to the Inspector General of Intelligence, 2.5 months. Now, I served as a member during the last term, and I know once you are sworn into the committee, no member may share anything spoken of within that committee. When we were sworn into the committee, that then was the rule, and I had not been sworn into any committee. As such, obviously, I cannot today speak of the outcome of the investigation by the Inspector General of Intelligence because the report was presented to the committee. Now, for it to be suggested, as some headlines read today, that I was somehow part of a criminal syndicate is absurd.
Let's talk now to the political home of Ziyanda Ngcobo. That's the Democratic Alliance spokesperson. Karabo Khachau joins us now live from Cape Town. Good evening to you, Karabo. I just want to know, what did the DA think of those allegations made by Mkhwanazi? How closely are you watching proceedings?
Dumela Ziyanda, Dumela to the people of South Africa. Thank you so much for having me. Look, the party's leadership has been briefed by Ziyanda Ngcobo, and her submissions to the party leadership are consistent with the submissions that she made to Newzroom yesterday. The bottom line is we would be having a different conversation here if Mkhwanazi's accusations of Ngcobo have to do with information that was presented to Diane while she was serving in the JSCI, which in between elections before she got sworn in again, she used that information. But that is not what happened. The revelations of the procurement of these properties happened in between elections, but the allegations were in the public domain, not stemming from the previous administration and whatsoever. And on the basis of them being in the public domain and the JSCI not being in operation at the time, it is the understanding of the Democratic Alliance and the party's leadership, as per Diane's briefing, that she then wrote, obviously, to the respective head of the intelligence that she wrote to, being the Inspector General of the Intelligence, to request that there be an investigation into this matter. If the JSCI was in operation, she would have already taken an oath of office to say that she can't talk about these things anyway. Then she would have then gone to that secret body in-house to talk about this matter, as was the case when the investigation report was concluded and it was presented before that particular committee, which she then, even though she's the one who raised alarms formally within the legislative frameworks as a member of parliament, she never came back to talk to the public about what the findings are because she understood that she can't do so. So the leadership of the Democratic Alliance maintains that we are a party of the rule of law, that if any accusations of such nature are made, that it is important that evidence is presented to back this up. What Diane has presented to the party we believe to be true.
Will she be
and
presenting herself before the inquiry?
Pardon? Say this again.
Will she be presenting herself before the inquiry? You've discussed believing in the rule of law. I'm not sure if you can hear me, Karabo. But will she then be coming to, rebut the allegations made by Mkhwanazi before this very inquiry?
Yes. So if indeed that is the requirement, she'll obviously then comply with the requirements of the law to refute those claims or not. This is something that we're well in conversation with the whippery of ourselves in Parliament and our leadership. So if there is a requirement at all in law for her to do such, she will do such. So, but the point I'm making here, Ziyanda, is Ndata Kwanazi bears the responsibility of proving this. And only if he can prove that this is true, then we will have a separate conversation. It is not right that we can just make allegations, and if on the side of from where we are standing, the evidence shows us that Diane is telling the truth and that Ndata Mkhwanazi is not, then we can't suspend her until.
I suppose the other concern here, Karabo Khachau, is the fact that she's a member of parliament, yes, but she's also on the alternate members list for the ad hoc committee that is going to be looking into these very allegations that have been made by Mkhwanazi. And the very nature of this list is that if anything happens to any of the current committee members, then she may be one of those called upon to form part of the committee. I mean, is that not a concern for the Democratic Alliance, given the nature of the allegations that have been made by Mkhwanazi? Yes, still to be tested, but nevertheless a cloud.
Look, Ziyanda, Mayor Barnett, as you correctly point out, is an alternate member. She has absolutely no voting rights. That's what alternate members are there for. They're just there. They don't have any voting rights. But the point we're making is there are people there who are representing the Democratic Alliance with full voting rights and the capacity to be able to judge the situation, as is the case. So then there's no question of whether or not the competence as far as the DA is concerned is missing or not, because it is there and it is on board. The point we're making, Ziyanda, is while Ndata Mkhwanazi has raised the alarms as he had, it is incumbent on him to provide proof to substantiate this, because as far as the order of election results, as far as the order of the constitution of the JSCI, as far as parliament records are concerned, all of this happened outside of the full constitution of the JSCI, number one. Number two, they happened outside during elections, and they happened, the allegations being made public were presented in between elections without a prior engagement in the sixth administration on the matter presented to the public eye. And so it would have been negligent for Mkhwanazi Barnett as a public servant to, even though she hadn't been delegated to any committee of parliament, to just shut up when weird things are happening within South Africa and not at least take the initiative while waiting to be appointed, if she knew or not at the time, right to the general, to the General of Intelligence, as she did. For me, those acts, as is the opinion of the leadership as presented by Diane, meant that she was proactive and did the right thing in line with her oath of office as a member of parliament.
Karabo Khachau, DA National Spokesperson, thank you very much for your time. Now, when we return, I'll still tell you more about Mkhwanazi's testimony, but shift your attention towards the deepening wars within the Crime Intelligence Agency. Mkhwanazi claims that history has repeated itself from the times of Richard Mdluli. You'll remember him, the former Crime Intelligence boss. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're still watching a special broadcast from the Brigitte Mabandla Justice Academy, where we're reflecting on the last 3 days of KZN Police Commissioner Mkhwanazi's testimony. Now, over the last few days, Kwanazi told us about the state of our crime intelligence agency and how it's been infiltrated by politicians. He tells the story of how the Investigating Directorate Against Corruption, which is a unit within the National Prosecuting Authority, has been infiltrated and is being politicized by the likes of the National Congress's Fadel Adams. He referred to the arrest of the KZN crime intelligence boss Dumisani Khumalo and others as an example of this, and accuses Adams of being a driving force behind this arrest. Now, you'll recall that Khumalo and his co-accused were nabbed in June this year for alleged corruption and fraud for the appointment of a brigadier, which there is alleged she doesn't have the requisite security clearance and qualifications. Now, the story becomes even more interesting because Khumalo and his co-accused have sought to relax their bail conditions, which include not stepping anywhere near crime intelligence premises across the country. Here's a little context of that court case.
The accuracy of claims made by National Police Commissioner Fani Masemola in his affidavit, which supports the bail relaxation bid by the crime intelligence officers, has come into question. Masemola claims an internal disciplinary investigation, which is being headed up by the Western Cape's top cop, Thembisile Pategile, has given the thumbs up for the KZN and Gauteng's top spies, Dumisani Khumalo and Josiah Likalakala, to return to work. And the only thing standing in their way are the conditions set by the court. But an affidavit from investigating officer Brian Pareachi outlines how he's never been asked by Masemola or Pategile, who's the SAP's internal disciplinary investigator, about the status of the probe.
I bear no knowledge of the finalization of the internal investigation, and neither have any of the other accused are the same as accused 1 and 4. And that the disciplinary hearing has been finalized and that they have been informed to return to their respective offices. The National Commissioner could not have authorized the accused to return to their respective offices, knowing fully well that there is a bail condition in place prohibiting the accused from entering any crime intelligence premises. And I'm convinced that he would have endorsed this condition in their transfer notices.
Khumalo, Likalakala and Nozipho Madondo, who was heading up intelligence analysis, will now have to wait until next week to hear whether their application to have their bail conditions relaxed will be granted. The trio's lawyers both relied on Masemola's affidavit to bolster their claim that they'll be prejudiced.
I received the comprehensive investigation report from the independent investigator. I propose not to attach the report here and to avoid prolixity, and on the grounds that the investigation report contains information which is not for public consumption based on the employer-employee relationship that existed between the applicants and the South African Police Service. The number of the findings made in the report are that there is no evidence of misconduct and or any contravention of regulation 5.4, beg your pardon, that's 5 in bracket 4 in bracket X, on the part of the applicants herein, or all the accused person in the main criminal case.
Ultimately, the Chief Magistrate opted to grant the state's application for a postponement to allow them to clear up the inconsistencies that have arisen in Pareachi and Masemola's affidavits.
There's a clear difference between contradiction and paradox. I'm not particularly keen to use the word contradiction. I would rather use paradox. So, based on that, it is only fair that the prosecution is granted the clarity it's granted the postponement to clarify this. The advantages are quite enormous. It might that which they might be achieved by this postponement might even cause the whole of this matter to collapse. It might even cause this whole matter to stand. Either way.
Accused number 7, Dineo Mukwele, who's at the center of this HR storm after allegedly having been appointed without the requisite top security clearance or qualifications, abandoned her push to amend her bail conditions as she's currently involved in an internal SAPS process. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo in Pretoria.
So that report was on the 15th of September. Chief Magistrate Vusimuzi Mahlangu had postponed the matter to allow for the state to verify and get to the heart of the inconsistencies between Fasima Masemola's affidavit, who said that an internal SAPS inquiry cleared Khumalo and his colleagues to return to their posts, while one affidavit by the investigating officer, Brian Padiachi, disputed this claim, saying the investigations are still at a sensitive stage. Now, this is important because Brian Padiachi also formed part of Mkhwanazi's testimony, Mkhwanazi questioning whether or not he has the requisite qualifications to be a senior detective within IDAC. Of course, you heard Mkhwanazi is saying that IDAC was a good institution that came as a result of the Zondo Commission, but is now politicized. By the way, that case involving Khumalo will be heard in 2 weeks' time on the 29th of September. But here's what Mkhwanazi had to say about the NPA's alleged rot and those who are involved.
It involves a magistrate who's presiding over a case that the members from crime intelligence are arrested on. He imposed a very bizarre bail condition towards those members. And the bail condition that is imposed by the magistrate in that case against these members from crime intelligence said explicitly that these members who are arrested for facilitating the appointment of Ms. Mukwele from BMW to crime intelligence, apart from going, this incident happened in Pretoria in their offices, they are barred not to go into any premises of crime intelligence anywhere in the Republic of South Africa. By default, it means the operation that they are busy with against the drug cartel must stop immediately. Maybe the magistrate, someone will say, no, he erred, it was an overreach. I don't believe it's that. I believe it was a calculated move to make sure that they put a stop on the involvement of these members with this operation. And I can confirm to date, commissioners, that that operation stopped.
Claims from Kwanazi about, in particular, Chief Magistrate Vusimuzi Mahlangu. Let's bring in Newzroom Africa's political economy editor, Vuyo Mvoko. I mean, Mkhwanazi talks about a calculated move to put a stop on the involvement of these members in this operation. So says Mkhwanazi about the magistrate. I mean, how would he even go about proving such an astonishing claim?
Well, that's what is going to be very interesting, because his critics has been saying all along that it's going to be, well, it was on the 6th, of July. Nice of him. It was a monologue. He was speaking, saying whatever he wanted to say without producing any shred of evidence. Fast forward to now, over the past 3 days, that's exactly what he's been doing. So the test, the litmus test of all the allegations he has been making is made, whether it's in July or over the past 3 days, is going to be on how he actually gets to prove. But I must say, it made for interesting listening when he tries to join the dots, so to speak. Now, whether, of course, he will be able to prove these things and what people who will respond are going to say is a different matter altogether. But there are lots of troubling things, when it comes to intelligence, that as he said, crime intelligence hasn't been cleansed since the times of your Richard Mdluli. In other words, suggesting that things are pretty much as chaotic, dangerous, and as terrible as they once were is quite an indictment. I mean, the character Mdluli has committed every offense you wouldn't even imagine that the head of crime intelligence would actually do, from allegations of killing, the former girlfriend's husband, to embezzling crime intelligence funds, to allegedly employing, friends and relatives, I mean, all these things you wouldn't expect. I mean, and then the guy sort of stayed in the system. At some point when Fani Masemola, the current National Commissioner of Police, he had to be packed while he was a divisional head, he had to be packed in his office because they didn't know what to do with him. I mean, how does that even happen,
Well, Mkhwanazi even questions how the South African Police Service even promoted someone like Shedrick Sibia.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Mdluli is the classical case, that here's someone who has committed, allegedly every offense there was to commit. Someone like that shouldn't belong in the police, let alone head, such components of the criminal justice system as your crime intelligence. But it has happened. And the scary part, as I say, is Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi saying it hasn't changed since then.
And I want us to pause there. I want us to play what Kwanazi said earlier, because four former police ministers were mentioned. He spoke about Nathi Mthethwa, who is linked to this case of Richard Mdluli, and how he says when he was acting National Police Commissioner, he was summoned, in essence, by Nathi Mthethwa to his house to get rid of the case.
That the inspector of intelligence was sitting on the same table, and then...
Okay, let's pause there. Let's hear what Kwanazi said.
And then I received a phone call from the Minister of Police, Nathi Mthethwa. Commissioners. I went to his residence in Waterkloof. And when I arrived there, the Inspector General is sitting on one side of the table, Mr. Mthethwa is sitting on the other side of the table. The minister says to me that I forced the Inspector General of Intelligence to write the letter that says, Mkhwebi is wrong, this matter must go to court. She said, I forced her. Then I told her, I said, no, Minister, Advocate Khateb is an old woman. She's an advocate. How can I point a gun at her and force her to write a letter? Besides, when this letter was written in her office, and she actually is not the author of the letter. The author of the letter is Advocate J. Govender, who is an experienced prosecutor person who's working in that office. She's the one that drafted the letter, not you, not the Inspector General of Intelligence. The minister didn't want to hear any of that. A simple say, we must stop prosecuting Mdluli, we must stop disciplinary case against Mdluli. Now, if we talk about political interference, that was the worst I've ever experienced. At that time, Commissioner, I come from the specialized operation. The only thing I know is to chase criminals. And I'm promoted to become the acting National Commissioner, and I'm confronted with this in front of me. And I said, but this is not what I signed for when I joined the police. This can't be right. The minister can't give me these instructions. Then I said to the minister, Minister, maybe you brought me into this position and you thought you were going to use me as a pawn because perhaps of my age or whatever, but you are wrong. I'm not going to do that. If you want me to stop charging Mdluli, you must put it in black and white. And then the minister said, no, Inspector General, you must give something in writing to the National Commission to stop this investigation. Inspector General said, no, come with me to my office so I can give you a letter.
I just want you to percolate on what Kwanazi said, and we'll pick up on this conversation just after the short break. Thank you so much for staying tuned to Newzroom Afrika Channel 405 as we bring you this special broadcast of the Madlanga Commission here in Pretoria. Day 3 has concluded of Mkhwanazi's testimony, and before the break, Vuyo Mvoko, our political economy editor, we played that snippet of Mkhwanazi talking about how there was a Nathi Mthethwa, the former police minister, sitting next to the Inspector General of Intelligence. At the time, it was Fikile Khatebe, and he was basically
supposed to play an
oversight role, who basically, he was being told, let this Richard Mdluli matter go.
The most astonishing thing, one of the most astonishing things to have come out of Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi's testimony is just how brazen various ministers were throughout the period in question. In other words, as far as the years he has covered in his testimony. And you ask yourself, for a country that has a constitution, we're told, is among the best in the world, you know, clearly this doesn't apply to certain people when they are in power. They can do pretty much whatever they want. In other words, it only applies to when the poor are deprived of water, when the poor like have no houses, when the poor can't feed themselves. You know, hang on, you know, we'll sort you out eventually. But when you look at the amounts of money and what people who are in power are actually able to do for themselves, for their families, for their friends, you know, then you realize that this is all, I'm putting it mildly, a whole joke.
So Baby Cele is implicated as well, who's a former minister, and even when he left his post, he was still allegedly interfering in police operations. In fact, Kwanazi claims that Cele deliberately tried to remove Khumalo from an investigation into counterintelligence official Feroz Khan. So remove Khumalo because Khumalo was investigating Feroz Khan, who had basically led a drug bust and intercepted and arrested two cops. But interesting in that was the issue of media colleagues of ours who are apparently being fed misinformation to tarnish and is a counter-attack on those trying to do their jobs. I want us to listen to this because it's so damning and telling of how the tentacles reach several industries and the media industry doesn't seem to have been spared.
Part of the system of protecting the drug squad, media plays part. Let me rephrase. Journalists within media houses, they are part of this in pushing certain narrative. Why I say this is because a very well-known veteran, Ziyanda Afrika, had contacted me almost immediately after this incident happened of Mbangeni. It happened beginning of the year last year. I think a month or so, he contacted me. He can come here and confirm that. He called me, contacted me, said, Gerald, I'm hearing that you interfered with the police operation. And what is going on? So I explained to him the details of what transpired. He understood. Then he said, okay, well, there's some stories and there's nothing wrong. So he did not publish that. Later in the year, which I suppose maybe this why Mkhwanazi is coming to me with this, is that first General Cele calls me, he's a former minister, he calls me and he says the Premier of Gauteng have approached him to go and work in Gauteng to help him fight crime in Gauteng. Therefore, he needs General Khumalo, who is a district commissioner and ex-task force commander in KZN, to come and work with him in Gauteng. And I find it strange because I think he called 2 or 3 times. While I was in a meeting, I kept giving the phone to one brigadier who was with me in the meeting. And after that, I had a conversation with General Cele, and then he pleaded with me to release this general to come to Gauteng. And my surprise was, but when General Cele was in the police, he did not like the general, Khumalo. He didn't like him at all. So why now that he's out of the police, he trusts Khumalo to come and work with him in Gauteng? It was just strange. And I turned to my colleague, Ziyanda Ngcobo, who was with me in a meeting. This was in Durban. Ziyanda Ngcobo works at the head office from HR. So I turned to her and said, but I received a strange call here. General Cele is asking me to approach Khumalo, who's a district commissioner in Zululand, to come and work with him in Gauteng, meaning he must resign from the police and go and work in Gauteng with him for 5 years, then he'll come back into the police, which was very odd. And General Ngcobo was also confused. He said, but as far as I know, Cele didn't like Khumalo. And he made all of us at the head office to believe that Khumalo is a bad person, why will he now suddenly want Khumalo to work with him? So it was just a strange call. I then contacted Gerald Khumalo. He's a Major General. I phoned Gerald Khumalo and said, Gerald Khumalo, this is a request I received from Gerald Cele. Gerald Khumalo just laughed and he said, well, don't worry, the general is not serious about that. So I asked him, what do you mean? He said, no, he's not serious. He wants me to back off on the case against Khan, General Khan from Crime Intelligence. So Cele is pursuing Khumalo to resign from the police so that he can stay away from the disciplinary case because he was appointed to deal with that case departmentally against General Khan. So Khumalo says, no, this is the approach of Cele to want me to back off. And that got me so upset, commissioners, that can really General Cele go to the extent of wanting a person to resign from the service because he wants to protect someone? It was very strange. I did not talk to General Cele from the day. I did not talk to him. I was very upset. It disappointed me as a person who's a former minister in the police. I was just upset.
Vuemvoko, what does that tell us?
Look, it's an old trick of intelligence operatives across the world to use journalists, right, to influence public discourse. It's no accident that as soon as Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi spoke, and then other truths about him emerged. Now, who is right and who's wrong, who's saying the truth, and who's spreading falsehoods, is part of what this commission is going to prove. But of course, we do have a responsibility as journalists to make sure that we are circumspect. We don't allow ourselves to be used, but very often, especially in high-stakes games, like the ones we are talking about. Over the next few weeks and months, I bet you, we are going to, everyone on whatever side is going to try and influence us. This has happened even in commissions past. I remember the Yefa Commission, Bulelani Ngcobo accused of being a spy and all of that. Attempts were made, monies were thrown at influencing the media about how to spread a particular narrative, and that's not going to stop. We just have to act responsibly. But we are going to be caught in the middle. There's no doubt about that.
And we'll be watching those proceedings very closely. 3 days of Mkhwanazi's testimony at the Madlanga Commission. The road ahead is going to be long, probably arduous, maybe even dangerous. But for now, this is where we leave things for our special broadcast from the Brigitte Mabandla Justice Academy. We'll be doing this again next week and the next couple of weeks at the very same time, where we give you a roundup of the testimonies that come, and of course we can anticipate they will be just as explosive. But for now, it's goodbye. Thank you for watching.